Welcome to episode 29 of the Woodwind Doubling channel. Today we're going to talk about a few frequently asked questions I've had from people over the past few months. Number one has been, how do I get a cruise ship gig? Well, the easiest way I can think of is to call up one of the agencies that represent musicians. There are a few of them available. I use ProShip because their headquarters are in Montreal here in Canada, and it's easy for me to get in touch with them and talk to people that I have some degree of connection with. Also with ProShip, when they quote me a rate, that is the rate that I get. There's nothing that they take off of my immediate take. And I've compared the numbers with what people get on the shipping lines that I've worked for that don't use ProShip, and I'm getting paid the same as them. So they're negotiating their percentage backstage with the shipping companies. That's fine with me. They get me a rate, I get that rate, and I've got no problems with that. Now, in terms of getting in touch with them, go onto their website, have a look, and you'll see a thing about getting in touch with them for auditions. I know right now they're actually particularly looking for woodwind doublers, sax, flute, and clarinet. So it's almost always alto, tenor, and flute. Alto, flute, and clarinet, or tenor, flute, and clarinet. There will be some weighting of flute and clarinet in the books, but really you need to be able to play everything and ready to go. There are some occasions where they'll actually ask you to take alto and tenor as well. Bit of a hassle because then you're definitely going to have to pay baggage for at least one of the instruments. So try and always go for contracts that are either alto and clarinet and flute, or tenor and clarinet and flute. Keep it down to that. If you can take a piccolo along as well, you'll sometimes find a use for that, and some of the things certainly not essential. So just get in touch with them directly, and then they'll have you do an audition. Now the audition is interesting because they'll ask you to actually video yourself at the same time that you are on the phone with them on a live phone call, and they usually want that like on a landline. It's a little easier to deal with. The way I did it is I actually set up all my backing tracks so they came through my stereo. I recorded myself on my iPad at the time for the video, and I used my iPhone to control the playback into the stereo, and then had them actually on the landline. So I used all of the resources there, and that worked out fine. It was a hefty big file. It kind of overwhelmed my iPad in terms of the resolution and the size of the file, and it took ages to upload. But it did finally get uploaded, and it got me the job. So that's how I managed to get onto cruise ships. You can talk to lines directly. I've also had experiences where people referred me to people at a cruise line to talk to. It was not successful in response. I suppose if I'd had an immediate response from somebody at a cruise line, that would have been great. But otherwise, I went through ProShip, and for me, it worked out better off. I actually ended up making a lot more money than I would have dealing direct with the particular line that I was referred to. Okay, another frequently asked question is, what instruments go on what books? This is, of course, referring to things in music theater where you get like books that would be labeled like Read 1, Read 2, Read 3, etc. The usual thing is that the higher instruments tend to get bunched together on the first books. So first book, one of the most common first books on any show I've ever seen is to have alto sax, clarinet, flute, and piccolo. And that first book will have usually all of the solo flute things and all the hard piccolo stuff on it. Book 2 also tends to be alto sax, flute, clarinet, piccolo, but will tend to have more emphasis on the clarinet. Quite often it'll have like the soloistic clarinet things. So they kind of assign Read 1 as the flute player, Read 2 as the clarinet player in terms of their solo responsibilities. Classically in older style shows in the Broadway era, you'll find Read 3 is the oboe, English horn, clarinet, and tenor saxophone book. Now these days you'll see more and more that there's a flute added on to those books, but that's the way to go. If you're an oboe player looking to branch into doing doubling, make sure you get your clarinet chops firmly in place, and you're going to need to play tenor saxophone. Occasionally you'll find alto saxophone on those books as well, but you can't really go wrong prepping yourself by playing oboe, English horn, clarinet, and tenor. The lower books, you'll tend to find a mix of things on them. The Read 4 and 5 books, quite often that's where you find baritone sax, bass, clarinet, bassoon. On the older show books, sometimes it'll just be baritone sax, bass, clarinet, say like the original scoring of Guys and Dolls. And then later on, you'll see other things creeping in. You can pretty much count on a B-flat clarinet being on most low reed books these days. everybody has a B-flat clarinet somewhere on their book. That's just, it's the bread and butter of musical theater. Vocal accompaniments means clarinets because they give you a nice cushion, they stay out of the way otherwise, and you can get a lot of color out of them. You'll see a lot of flute as well on baritone books these days. In fact, in some ways, the baritone player has to carry more stuff and deal with more problems in some ways than anyone else, because so many shows now you need to play bassoon. That means you're dealing with playing an instrument in concert bass clef as well as the transposed instruments in treble clef. You also need to deal with playing tenor clef parts on the bassoon. You need to deal with issues on flute and often piccolo and clarinet as well. So actually, in some ways, it used to be the easy chair. Now, in some ways, it's a harder chair. Some of the fourth books these days can be a real mix of things, a real mix of whatever else they need to bung on to the books to make things work out. What you'll find on some shows is that they'll put bass clarinet on a fourth book, along with, say, flute, clarinet, and tenor. And they'll use that in conjunction with the baritone player on bass clarinet as well. You can actually have two bass clarinets or something that way, or have the baritone player on a contrabass clarinet. So it sort of helps spread around some of those responsibilities. Now, that being said, those are the most common divisions. If you're a bassoonist, you want to lean towards playing baritone and tenor saxophone. It's another common thing to have tenor saxophone on there. If you are an oboe player, you want to definitely lean towards alto and tenor saxophone. For everybody, clarinet. You got to have that, and pretty much these days everybody's got to be able to play flute as well. Next question is, how do I get into professional pits? Well, the way I got into professional pits, first of all, was subbing for someone. You want to find the person that plays the instruments that you play, and you want to get in touch with them personally and say, hey, I play these instruments, and I think I'm at the standard where I could come in and sub for you. Another way to do it, of course, is to ask just to sit in the pits. If there's someone that you know that's working in a pit already, in a professional situation, ask them if you could just come and sit in the pit as a guest, just auditing, with no expectation of getting any subbing or any work out of it. You can have some interesting experiences that way. I know quite a lot of people who've done that with no expectation of getting work, but have actually then gotten some work. Part of that is that people are used to seeing them around the pit, and they get a level of comfort at being in a pit situation. So that's one of the ways I'd suggest asking people if you just sit in and watch the show from the pit to see how things work. And of course, the other one is then being available for someone as a sub. Now, a sub is a hard thing to do in a lot of ways because you don't have the luxury of the full orchestra rehearsals. You have to get the book, and if you're lucky, get a pit recording and possibly a conductor video and put all that together, learn it on your own time, usually view a couple times in the pit, and then sub in, do the show. So it's certainly got a lot of challenges, but that's one of the main strategies people will use to get into that kind of situation. Someone asked me about how I do the time-lapse videos for my own channel. I've done those using GoPro cameras. GoPros are so easily fitted in different places. They're quite out of the way, and almost invisible most of the time. And I think I was usually setting it on 1 exposure per second. So what it does is essentially takes still images at that point, and when you pull it into the GoPro software in the computer, it'll ask you if you want to make a time lapse out of that, and then it will output like a video file from that, usually an AVI file or an MP4 file. And that's what I've used, and then you can use other software to then insert that into whatever you like. Most video cameras and still cameras and things like that will do some type of time-lapse thing, and really what you want to do is calculate out how long an event is and how long you want the result to be. So for me, I was working a show that was about 2 hours in length, and I knew I wanted to have a video that was about 3 to 4 minutes. So I was able to calculate how many frames to make that at the time, and it worked out quite nicely. I plan on doing some more of those, possibly at the upcoming season at Stratford and whatever else I end up subbing into or playing. Someone asked me about doing their own YouTube channel, and say, go for it. I just started doing this in September 2016. I did a little practice with my own channel, just doing personal videos and things like that, just to learn how to upload and things like that, and how to tag things. Certainly, if you're doing it and you want to make any sort of money from it, to get everything set up with Google AdSense and monetize everything from the get-go. That way, if things do take off, the last thing you want to do is put up a video that goes viral and discover, gee, I'm not making any money off of this myself. So make sure that you get all those things in line and monetize all your content as it goes up. But also make sure that if you are putting up content that you own it, so that you don't have to share that money with someone else. Now, I've used various different rigs for recording. I've used GoPro cameras, I've used DSLR, I've used regular video cameras. I've probably used 5 or 6 different source video things. I've even used my iPhone for things at times, and I've done various approaches in the way of audio as well. It's a bit too detailed to go into right now, but if this is something that interests the viewers, let me know, and I could give you a sort of complete rig rundown on how I've built my own lights and how I set up the camera and exposure and things like that, and walk you through some of the editing software. So there you have it. That's a few of our frequently asked questions of late. Thank you as always for watching the Woodwind Doubling channel. Please subscribe if you haven't already. We've just nudged over 200 subscribers. I'm very happy about that, and closing in on 10,000 total views. So I didn't know what to expect when I started this, but I'm very gratified by the results. Again, thanks everyone for watching, and I'll see you next time.